Sorry, I kind of broke my microphone when I dove over the table. Anyways, in this video, we're gonna finish the laundry room because I don't know about you, I'm pretty sick and tired of building cabinets. So I'm not even gonna talk that much. We're just gonna get in there and start building. So let's do that. Oh, you might also wanna check the video description and go over and sign up on Patreon because we just opened submissions for our latest contest where you could win a chance for me to come build a project with you. But you gotta be signed up on Patreon. Okay, let's build some cabinets. Stupid microphone. Okay, if you didn't watch the previous videos, then you didn't see how I finished the laundry room up to this point with the lower cabinets, and I installed those butcher block countertops, but now we got to do these upper cabinets, and we got to figure out how to cover that ugly soffit. We also got to figure out cabinets above the washer and dryer to house the laundry shooting range, and we'll put cabinets on either side. These are not mine, I swear. So with all that being said, let's start building. Or rather, looking at the design I just quickly threw together in SketchUp. These are the cabinets that will be under the soffit. There's going to be one section of open shelving and then 3 banks of just big cabinet doors. This is the section that will be above the washer and dryer. Just 3 simple cabinet boxes. At least you'd think it would be simple, but I've come to learn nothing in life is ever simple. Anyways, it was time to start ripping down some 3/4 inch unfinished birch ply. Now you might be asking yourself, didn't you use pre-finished birch ply for the lower cabinets? Why yes I did. But this particular box I'm working on now is going to be that one section of open shelving, which is going to be painted, and pre-finished ply just doesn't paint great. So for this one box, I'm going to use unfinished birch. Glad you asked. Now, whenever I'm doing cabinets that have to fit into a particular space, check out that Bourbon Moth custom stop block available on my website. I always like to design them on the computer first so that I can get a nice cut list, because that makes building the cabinet super easy because I can just zip zap zoop all the pieces and then slap them together. I started out by cutting all of my carcass pieces, and then I just ripped down some little scrap pieces of wood that I'm going to glue onto the very bottom to set my lower shelf level. Don't worry, if that didn't make any sense, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about right now. Basically, I just run a bead of glue along the very bottom of one of my side panels. I take this little scrap piece of wood and I tack it in place with some 1¼ inch long 16 gauge brad nails, just to kind of hold it till the glue dries. What this is going to do is create a little lip so I can set my lower shelf or the bottom of my cabinet on, and it'll just automatically put it at the right height. I don't have to fumble around with clamps or anything like that. This is kind of the down and dirty method for hooking cabinet boxes together. But for this application, down and dirty is kind of what I'm going for. Now, watch as a true professional hooks all these pieces of wood together. You gotta really use your head when constructing cabinets. Very carefully so nothing falls down, you spread glue on top of your little lip and then set your shelf in place, and I just tack it in there. Because it's gonna be on the inside of the cabinet, it's gonna be painted, and I can fill those holes and you'll never know they're there. Once I have the lower shelf bottom thing installed, I lay my whole cabinet down on its side, and then I add a nice topper piece. This is exactly the same size as my lower piece. The only difference is I'm putting this at the very top of the cabinet because, well, that's just how I designed it, I guess. Now I know all you negative Nancys out there are probably watching this thinking he's just gonna glue and tack these boxes together. Now, to be honest, that would probably be strong enough, but don't worry, I'm going to add some screws just to make sure it's rock solid. So I start by drawing a center line down the middle of the piece of plywood that I need to screw into, just using this T-square and a mechanical pencil, just in case you didn't have eyes and couldn't see that that's exactly what I was doing. Then using an Amana countersink bit, I countersunk a few holes so that my screws sit just below the surface of the plywood, and then I add in some 2-inch GRK screws just to tie everything together. Now on this particular box, there's going to be some internal shelves. Remember I said this is the open shelving section of the cabinets. So I add my shelves to the inside, and I'm not going to make these adjustable. I'm going to make them fixed so that I can put a face frame across the front and it'll look nice and built in. So once I have my shelf positioned exactly where I want it to go, I add some more screws to lock it in place, and then I add one more shelf just above that shelf because, well, 2 shelves are always better than 1 shelf, if you ask me. And to be honest, we kind of have 3 shelves in this because if you count the bottom, which I do, that's 3 shelves. And then to finish off the entire box, I ripped down some 1/4-inch birch ply. Now this particular ply is pre-finished on one side. But as I mentioned, we're going to be painting this entire thing, so I'm going to choose the unfinished side to be on the inside, leaving the pre-finished on the outside, which you will never see. After adding a liberal amount of glue, I tack the entire thing in place. Not only will this add a lot of structure to our box, but it makes sure it's nice and square. And just like that, 1 box done, a bunch more to go. Over there, all the pretty little box cabinet things. So it was back over to the table saw. This time I started ripping down some pre-finished birch ply. I chopped it down over on the miter station, and then using the exact same method I used before, I start hooking the entire thing together. The only difference is I did not put any fixed shelves inside these. I will do adjustable shelves, but we'll get to that in a little bit. In no time, I had 2 more boxes constructed, and then it was time for the last box to go under the soffit, but this one's gonna have this weird angle to it because the wall actually angles, so I have to build the cabinet to fit in towards the wall. So I took my top and bottom piece, I clamped them together, and I cut the correct angle at the same time with the track saw because why do the same thing twice when you can do it once? Then I figured out the angle I needed to match the angle of my top and bottom piece. I cut a side piece over on the table saw with that angle, which just happened to be 45 degrees, and then I started cutting some other various angles to get my other side piece. And then I had to figure out how to hook my 2 angled sides together. I thought about this for a while, and then I decided just to tape them. Nah, I'm just kidding. The tape was just there to align everything while I squirted some CA glue inside that seam. Then once the glue was in there, I just flopped it back over. The tape held everything exactly where I wanted it to. And once the glue was dry, all I had to do was peel the tape off. The only problem was that the glue wasn't actually dry. So when I peeled the tape off, well, it just all fell apart. Stupid Jason. So I retaped and re-glued the entire thing. This time I put tape on both sides, and I waited a lot longer before I took the tape off. Also, before I took the tape off, I kind of angled some pin nails in through the back because you're not going to see the back, and I figured, what the heck, couldn't hurt. This time, when I peeled the tape off, it stayed together. And although my seam wasn't perfect, I thought it was close enough. I added some more of those little scrap pieces at the bottom to set the bottom on, and then I added some screws from all the various sides to lock it in place. Then I just started piecing together the other sides of the cabinet to make it the correct shape to match my pre-cut top and bottom piece. And just like that, I had what appeared to be a correctly built angled cabinet. I added my 1/4-inch backer to the back. Would have been really silly if I added it to the front. And bada bing, bada boom, all of my cabinets to go under the soffit portion of the laundry room are, well, loosely constructed. We still got quite a bit of work left to do. I'm not going to show you because it's pretty much the exact same process, but I also built the 3 upper cabinets to go above the washer and dryer. Now you'll notice one of them doesn't have a top on it, and that's because that's where the laundry chute is going to dump into. Now it was time to drill all of my holes that will house the pegs for my adjustable shelves. I started doing this by sitting on the floor and trying to do it vertically, but that was just stupid, and I wised up after a few, laid the cabinet down on its side, and did it on the workbench. Now for the shelves, I just cut them out of pre-finished 3/4 inch plywood. Once I had the correct sizes and shapes, I went over to the workbench with my Black & Decker iron, and I ironed on some edge banding. I used a razor blade to trim the ends right tight with the end of the shelf, and then I used this little plastic squeeze cutter doohickey that's probably called an edge band trimmer, but don't quote me on that, to trim down the excess edge banding, and then I sanded it all smooth. Now I don't have pre-finished edge banding, although that is a thing, so after I got the edge banding on there and sanded, I just wiped on a little wipe-on poly, good name, and it pretty closely matched the pre-finished ply. Then I took the shelves back over and stuck them inside my cabinet carcasses. And other than the fact that they don't have a face frame, they looked pretty good. Now it was time to see if my boxes would actually fit under the soffit. So with Craig's help, we carried them into the laundry room and we started to slide that first cabinet into place. The only problem was the boxes did not fit under the soffit, because when I took the measurements, I forgot to subtract just a little bit to make sure that they would fit. Serenity now. Thankfully, I did have wiggle room on the bottom. It was just kind of a pain, so it was back into the shop. I grabbed the track saw, I zip-zap-zooped the crud out of all of them, and I took a cool 3/8 of an inch off the bottom of every single one of my boxes. With nothing really damaged except my pride, I hauled the box back into the laundry room, hoisted it back up onto the counter very carefully so I didn't scratch the freshly installed butcher block. And with Craig's assistance, this time we managed to slide the cabinet boxes in under the soffit. Phew, that was a close one. And then I remembered that this particular cabinet box is actually covering up an outlet, which is a no-no. So before I really install the rest of the cabinets, I had to rectify this situation. Now my wife said she wouldn't mind having an outlet inside the open shelves, so I just cut a hole in the back of the cabinet, bada bing, bada boom, and we were in business. So I brought in my next box, slid that in place, then brought in the next box, slid that in place, and then this is the big moment of truth. Will that last angled box fit? It did not, but only because I couldn't get it past the light switch on the right-hand side. So I fumbled around getting my middle cabinet back out. Then I was able to slide the end cabinet over and into place. And then I grabbed the remaining cabinet box and very carefully managed to wiggle that in between all the rest. This really is like a giant game of Tetris, but thankfully all the boxes fit not only under the soffit but between the two walls, and we were in business. Whew. That could have gone smoother, but they're in there. Then it was time to bring the other boxes in for above the washer and dryer. And of course I did the same flippin' thing over here and didn't cut them to the right length. Dang you, Jason. I swear I am making so many flipping mistakes when it comes to this laundry room. What is my problem? So one by one, I took the boxes back into my shop and trimmed a little bit off with the track saw and then brought them back into the laundry room. This time the problem wasn't the height, it was the fact that that frame around the laundry chute stuck down too far, so I had to trim a little bit off the back of the cabinet. Then I managed to slide that one into place. And then finally we were ready for the last carcass. Which is good, because if I had to install one more cabinet box, Craig was going to be dealing with my carcass, if you know what I mean. Now, I cut this one down in the shop before I brought it in, so we had plenty of room to slide it in, and all of the cabinet boxes were in their final resting place. So I grabbed some clamps and some screws. I screwed all the cabinet boxes to each other so they were nice and rigid, and then I screwed the boxes themselves into the wall and the ceiling surround so that everything was locked in place. Then I brought in all of my nicely edge-banded plywood shelves, installed them on their pegs, Ooh, shelves. And with that, we were ready for face frames.
This video is sponsored by BetterHelp. Now, everybody from time to time could use somebody to talk to, whether it's because you're feeling blue or you're struggling with other aspects of your life. I know personally, when I was growing up, my father struggled with depression, and it took a long time before he even admitted to the family that he was struggling with depression. I don't know if it's because he just wanted to appear strong for the rest of the family, or he didn't want to admit it to himself, but when he finally made that decision to seek some help and talk to somebody about it, we saw such a huge change in his personality, and it was a big help for the family as a whole. Everybody's busy, and it's a real easy excuse to put off trying to find somebody to talk to. Maybe it's because you go to work early, or you get home from work late. Maybe you have kids that you're always trying to deal with. Whatever it may be, BetterHelp's whole premise is to try and make connecting with somebody to talk to just incredibly easy, and do it in a way that fits with your schedule. So if you want to get connected with a licensed therapist who is solely trained to give you helpful, unbiased advice, all you have to do is go to betterhelp.com/bourbonmoth, or you can click the link right down there in the video description. You'll answer a few questions, and then they'll connect you with a licensed therapist, a lot of times within 48 hours. BetterHelp wants to make it super easy for you to connect with a therapist, which means doing whatever is going to be most comfortable for you. So you can do it all via your phone or computer, whether that's messaging, video call. You get to decide how you want to connect with somebody. Let BetterHelp connect you with a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. You can either go to betterhelp.com/bourbonmoth, click the link in the video description, or just choose Bourbon Moth when you sign up for a special discount off your first month. Huge thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring this video, and seriously, if you feel like you need somebody to talk to, BetterHelp's a great option.
For our face frames, we're going to use the exact same thing we used on the lower cabinets, because why the heck wouldn't we? Which is poplar. So I milled up a bunch of poplar out in the shop, and then I brought in a bunch of pieces that should fit across the front of the cabinet. Now, I have heard it said that I am insane for building these giant face frames when I should just bring in a bunch of pieces and just piece it together in place, but that's just not my style. I like nice, glued together seams. I like it to be rock solid. I like it to look like it's been there for 1,000 years and could be there for 1,000 more. And I also like to punish myself. So I build giant face frames and then try and wiggle them into place. You don't have to do it this way, but it's the best way, in my opinion, to get a nice, cohesive look on the front of your cabinets. Now, the key to this is to build your frame first. So I brought in my rails and my stiles, made sure they were all the correct size, and then, like a moron, I tried to add my internal stiles, but as you'll see here, that was dumb because I don't have enough hands to hold everything in place, and I almost decapitated myself in 3, 2, 1. Oop! Luckily, I didn't damage any of the pieces or the cabinets I worked so hard to install. With that, I decided just to mark on my lower rails exactly where all my dividers were, and I can figure out all the math and the orientation out in the shop. So I took all the pieces back into the shop, I added some pocket holes to all the ends that needed pocket holes, and the first thing I did was hook my entire frame together, because that's the most important part. Once I had the frame hooked together, I could start working on all the internal stuff. Now this thing was so big it didn't fit on one workbench, so I had to kind of build a bridge across two. Then I used some spacer blocks to set all my dividers at the correct lengths and widths and heights and measurements and, inches and math and stuff like that. And pretty soon I had the entire face frame assembled, gave it a quick sanding, and then I carried the entire thing back into the laundry room. Now, if you ever have to install face frames in place like this, definitely get yourself some Total Boat Thixo, because it's thick, and it's not gonna run down the front of your cabinets and get wood glue all over the place. It really is a treat to work with when you're installing face frames. You can put on a nice thick bead and it will stay put. So once I had a liberal amount of Thixo all over the front of the raw plywood, I brought in my giant face frame and I held my breath, hoping that just once on this project, I could get a measurement right the first time. And you know what? I actually did. It fit like a flippin' glove. I even had to tap it into place a few spots, which means that it was a nice, tight fit. Finally, something went right. Once I had it where it needed to go, I just tacked it with a few 16 gauge brad nails. I'll fill those later before I paint, and our face frame was installed. I know you're wondering, everybody's asking the same question, but what about those giant holes in the soffit above the cabinets? Yeah, I've been wondering that too. Now, my thought all along was just to encase it in some sort of decorative element that looked like it could potentially just be part of the cabinets themselves. So I went back into the shop and I built a giant ladder. And then I took that ladder and using a rabbiting bit, I rabbited out a nice groove on the back of each one of my little ladder holes. And I inserted some 1/4-inch MDF. Just like this. And like that, and also like this. Once all my pieces fit nice and tight, I added a bead of glue around the edge, and then I tacked them in place with a 23 gauge pin nailer. Ooh. And it looked something like this. Then I took this giant piece of decorative trim, and I went back into the laundry room, added some more thickset up on the soffit, and very carefully, I caressed it into place. And by caressed it, I mean I beat on it with a mallet until it submitted, which it eventually did, and it actually looks pretty good. I mean, unless I told you, I don't think you'd walk in here and say, hey, there's a giant soffit under there, isn't there? And if you are that person, you are not welcome in my home. You can take your negative thoughts and leave. So with the face frame all done under the soffit, or is there a soffit under there? I switched my attention to the cabinets above the washer and dryer. Threw together a quick face frame for those. The only difference was I left them long on one side with a 45-degree angle, so I could also add a similar decorative casing on the end and cover up that pre-finished ply. So with a little fixo, I squeezed it in place, and my seam came together pretty nice and tight. These are always my favorite little elements on cabinet builds because it takes your cabinet boxes from looking just like a bunch of slapped together plywood to something that's actually pretty nice looking. I was happy that my mitered seam came together nice and tight. Then all I had to do was add a little trim around the top so that it was nice and snug against the ceiling. And we were ready to start making doors and drawer faces. So I was back into the shop to mill up a bunch more poplar. I cut it down to width, I ran it through the planer, and then I went into the laundry room to get my measurements right from the source. Sure, I could have tried to pull them off of my computer. You know, I have that 3D design, but that would have been foolish because I doubt I built it exactly like I had it in the computer. So when possible, take your measurements off the cabinets. Now might be a good time to tell you that we have new hats on our website, and don't they look dashing? Eventually, I had my entire list of parts and pieces I needed to cut and make for all of my cabinet doors and drawer faces. So I went into the shop and I cut all of those pieces. It was pretty simple actually. I had one pile for my rails and one pile for my stiles. Now this is very important because my rails are going to get tenons and my stiles will not. So I need to keep those separated. I don't know what I'm doing here. Just ignore me. Before I could start cutting my tenons to hook everything together, I needed to add a nice 1/4-inch groove down the center of all of my pieces. Now I like to do this on the table saw, sending it through one direction, flipping it 180 degrees and sending it through the other direction. That way I know I have a perfectly centered groove down the middle of each piece. Once I had that groove cut on all of my rails and stiles, it was time to cut my tenons on just my rail pieces. So I went over to my dado saw and using a crosscut sled, I just cut a little bit off the top. And then I flipped it over and cut a little bit off the bottom. and voila. I have a nice 1-inch tenon on the end of all my pieces. Now, you see me making multiple passes there. I could have put in a thicker dado stack, but I was lazy, so I just wiggled it back and forth a bunch of times until it was the right size. Then I would go over and I would piece together each frame as I had the rails cut because I didn't want to get anything mixed up, and I cross-referenced each piece and part with my pre-made list that I wrote down on the piece of paper, and pretty soon all my frames were dry fit together. Now, before I glue them together, I decided to take all of them back into the laundry room and just test to make sure they were roughly the right size, because it would be a lot easier to change the size now than after I get them glued up. So I fit the little cabinets under the sink, and those fit. And then I took all the cabinet frames and I put them above the washer and dryer, and guess what? Those all fit too. So I was on a roll. I went over and I took the bigger cabinet doors and I stuck them in the cabinets under the what used to be the soffit, but is now a beautifully framed cabinet. Those fit. And then those little cabinet doors fit. And then finally my drawer faces fit. I think hell might have just froze over because I am on a roll with these measurements. Confident that all of my cabinet doors and drawer faces were the correct size, I went back into the shop and I started cutting down all of my panels for the center out of 1/4-inch MDF. With all those pieces cut to the right size, I inserted them into the corresponding frames to make sure that they were the right size, and then I glued everything together. This took a while, so I'm not going to show you the entire process, but before morning, I had all 13 or 14 doors and drawer faces in clamps. The next day, I came out in the nice morning light and I ran them all through the drum sander on both sides, and then I drilled out my holes for my hinges. I just mark them out with a little plastic jig and then drill it out over on the drill press. You don't have to be fancy, you just have to be accurate. T-shirt idea, I call it. And then I touched up all the sanding, getting rid of the marks that the drum sander left behind. And while Craig, that's right, Craig did do some sanding in this video, sanded down the actual cabinet boxes, I installed the only 2 sets of drawer slides in this entire project. What a treat. And then, before I installed any of my cabinet doors and drawer faces, I pre-drilled everything for the hardware. Because it's a lot easier to do this in your shop than after everything's all installed and you're trying to be super careful and then you get sawdust everywhere. So anyways, I like to do this in my shop whenever possible. Oh, and I also had to build the 2 drawer boxes for the corresponding slides that I installed earlier. So, I built 2 drawer boxes. Of course, I'm using Bloom undermount slides, so I installed my little orange clippy doohickeys, and then I carried my drawer boxes into the laundry room and I clicked them into place. Just like that. I always love this part. It's so satisfying. Then, with my drawer boxes installed, there was only one thing left to do, and that was to start installing cabinet doors. Now, I'm using these Bloom inset cabinet door hinges, and the easiest way to install these is just to get your measurement right on the face frame, install your clips, and then all you got to do is clip the door in place. You can adjust it with the little adjustment screws, but it's really pretty simple. In fact, I like to just mark out on a scrap piece of wood exactly where I need to set the clips. I mark it on the top, I mark it down on the bottom, stick my head in there, I install the little clip, and then I grab the cabinet door and I just click it in place. I mean, I would love to give you an in-depth tutorial of how to install cabinet doors, but that's pretty much it. The one thing you do have to figure out on inset cabinet doors is some sort of stop, because they don't want to just sit right inside the face frame, they want to keep going. So I always just get a scrap piece of wood and glue it on the inside of the face frame. That creates a nice little edge for the cabinet doors to rest against and stay in their correct orientation. After most of the cabinet doors were installed, I installed the 2 drawer faces just using some playing cards as spacers, and then those pre-drilled holes that I drilled for the hardware, I just sent some screws through to attach the drawer face temporarily. Then I pulled it open, added some more screws from the inside, removed the screws through the pre-drilled holes for the hardware, and added the hardware. Did you get all that? Good. Then I kept working my way around. I installed the cabinet doors under the sink. I installed the cabinet doors above the washer and dryer. Whew. And I think this laundry room is pretty much constructed. No, I will not be painting these myself. I'm hiring a professional. But let's look back, shall we, at how this entire project started. This is what the laundry room used to look like. And this is what it looks like now. It used to be pink and very 90s. And now, oh well, we went back to a 90s picture. And now it's clean and elegant. And yes, it needs paint, but like I said, I'm not gonna do that. Somebody else is. What it used to look like, ooh, oh, oh. And what it looks like now, ooh. Ah.
Oh. That's a lot of cabinets. I gotta tell you, I keep thinking there can't possibly be anywhere else in the house to put more cabinets. And somehow, my wife, she finds a way. But as far as the laundry room goes, well, these ones are done. I mean, sure, they're not painted yet, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna hire someone to come in. I actually have a guy that's great at painting. He'll take all the doors off, take them back to his shop, paint them there. He'll tape everything off, paint it in place, and it'll look great. So, as far as I go, this thing's done. Check the video description. There's links down there to something. There's also a link to our Patreon. If you're not signed up on Patreon, we just opened up the submissions for our latest Patreon contest where you could win a chance for me to come out to your shop and build with you. So you should click down there. There's also a link to our merchandise where if you want some new hats, we got new hats on the website, new hats and t-shirts too.